Hey guys, and welcome back. So this is part 3 of the George Jones lawnmower build. So this behind me is a 1992 John Deere F932 front mower. This particular model, there's several other models. There's a 915, the 935, the 1145, and a handful of other odd numbers. However, this one has a 3-cylinder Yanmar gas engine with a 60-inch mower deck on the front. So this video is going to be dedicated to the PTO and the PTO failures and problems that these things are plagued with. So they're notorious for having PTO issues. And I'm going to show you guys how to fix it, because there's not a lot of videos out there on the web regarding these tractors, and I figured I might as well make one because I'm in the middle of it now. So this whole video is all about the PTO. So I know it's a long video. Thanks in advance, and hope you enjoy this video and get something useful out of it. So let's dive right in. So we fast forwarded quite a bit. Boom, look at that. We got the PTO shaft out of the machine and it's sitting here. I'm trying to fast forward through a lot of boring parts, you know, because this machine isn't the most fun thing to watch me work on. So, but anyway, the PTO shaft, it's not looking very good. This is where the bearing was riding on the shaft, and it destroyed the shaft itself, and the bearing is wiped out. So that's not very cool. So I'm going to try to repair this shaft because I don't feel like spending $500 at the John Deere garage. And also this pulley, I don't know how well you can see that on the camera, but there's a big crack right here. And there's a series of cracks actually all around the perimeter of this pulley. So pulley goes on like that, and it's not supposed to wobble like that. So what's happened is this is all wore out on the inside of the pulley. This side is okay. So we've got some carnage. I don't know what I'm going to do because I've quoted this whole assembly out at John Deere and it's about $1,000. Way too much for this budget. So I'm gonna attempt to weld this. I'm gonna heat this up red hot, and I'm gonna weld this with a MIG welder and build that up again and grind it smooth. And that'll be a new shoulder for the bearing to sit on. And then I'm going to have to figure out the pulley. I might have to buy a new pulley, but we'll see. We'll see how much I want to spend on this turd. I mean, this beautiful John Deere mowing machine. I was debating on what to do with this PTO shaft. See how chiseled that is and how deformed. Anyway, I went on eBay and I found this PTO shaft right here. I painted it, so it didn't show up that way. But it came with a mint pulley. It came with basically 2 of everything. So this is the original adjusting saddle. Came with a new one of those. All the springs. Came with the shims. Now I've got tons of shims. New one of these. I'm going to press that bearing out. I bought a new bearing online. Actually, that was like a $70 bearing. Just this bolt and washer here. This was about $15 online, and that also came with the PTO bundle. And this is like a really hard bolt. This is like a grade 10.8 or something like that, metric John Deere bolt. You know, so this is actually the correct bolt that belongs in there. So I'm glad that that was included. All these little things add up. A new block for the front, a pillow block with adjusting collar. And this is the one that came off of my tractor. And I'm going to reuse this pulley for the PTO brake. It's wider than this one. But everything else was perfect. So for $200, I got this PTO shaft and all these goodies. Now, whenever I went to the John Deere dealership, they quoted me roughly $1,200 for basically what you see here. I was blown away. So eBay is your friend whenever you're working on these old mowers and these old machines. This is the bearing that fits on that shaft, and look how loose of a fit that is. Here you can see where the keyway just totally destroyed that shaft. This one over here is nice and clean. This is the new bearing. Just wanted to show you how nice this bearing fits. Isn't that awesome? Now, these shims go in between the bearing race and the pulley. So I'm just going to take that keyway out. So that pulley sits on the end of the shaft, just like that, and then this bolt cinches that whole thing together. So that whole thing was loose on the original PTO shaft. So this is really nice. Everything is nice and tight the way it should be. I took a risk. This was a used part, this PTO shaft and this pulley, but I'm glad I did because everything is just 100% perfect, usable. These pillow blocks here, this one is cracked, but the bearing itself comes out and is removable. This bearing, even though it's a little dirty, it feels really good. So I'm going to take, this is the one for my machine. I'm going to take this one, essentially just swap-a-roo. That's going to be my new pillow block. A little bit of play in there, but that's a greasable union, so that kind of has to move around. So I'm excited. That looks like it's going to work really well. Just show you guys how this goes together. This is the PTO brake. This goes on first. That essentially floats in between this and this. So this is a spacer. This goes on in between the PTO brake and this pillow block bearing. So everything kind of goes together and fits really nice. Now the difference is, though, this bearing doesn't have a set screw in it. So this has a collar that's actually eccentric. So this goes on. And see how you can turn it just about, maybe a quarter of a turn, one way or the other. That actually tightens up and cams onto that bearing that sticks out. See that? So that goes right on there and turns just ever so little. And that's what locks that bearing onto the shaft. Pretty cool design. After I cleaned up these parts a little bit, I did notice that there's quite a bit of slop in that bearing. I'm just going to replace this whole unit, this Fafner bearing. It's going to replace the whole thing. That way, I won't have to mess with this PTO probably ever again, as long as I own the machine anyways. I've already gone ahead and taken the C-clip out of this bearing retainer. I'm going to now press that bearing. Doing a lot of talking. Yeah. Definitely makes a lot of racket. Every time it jumps like that, it moves like 1/8 of an inch. Jeez. Taking quite a bit of force to do that, too. Wowza. Look at that. It's all rusted around there. Probably should have heated that up a little bit, but... Oh, excellent. Well, I gotta find the rest of it, but there's the bearing. Alright, so as you can see, the housing is a little rusty on the inside. I'm going to take and clean that up before I drive that new bearing in. Emery cloth. Just going to clean up that surface a little bit before I press that new bearing in. Don't got to go overboard. It is a precision fit. Just a little bit of oil on there goes a long ways in pressing this thing. And there it is, bottomed out. All right, so I was just looking at this after I pressed this in, and I don't know if you can see that or not, but I just literally can push that bearing out by hand. So something's wrong there. So I'm going to take that bearing out and see what's wrong with that housing. So here's the bearing housing after I took it out. And it looks like there's some dark marks in there. I don't know if that light's helping at all. It looks like there's some dark marks in there. It could have been that I sanded this a little too much, and as a result, the surface in there is just wore out. But it looks like it could have been that that race was sliding in there before. So I'm going to have to reuse the original bearing housing that came on the tractor, and hopefully this will be a tighter fit. This is the one that came with the new parts I got on eBay. This is the original one. So this one looked to be in a little bit better shape, condition-wise. I was kind of hoping to use this one, but it looks like I'm going to have to use this one over. So we'll press the new bearing in and see how this bearing retainer, holds the bearing. So that one's in. That one feels like it's actually secure. So this bearing retainer is going to work fine. I'm upset that I couldn't have used this one, but I ground this one to make it, smooth again, so it'll be fine. However, that is a much tighter fit, and I probably ruined this one by sanding it. It probably was just tight enough to fit that new bearing. This is cast, so you don't want a really super tight fit because you could potentially crack the housing. And then, I don't know where you'd even find one of these. Probably have to go online again. So you don't want to have too tight of a fit there because it could potentially crack the housing, and then you're really in trouble. This is really hard to weld that stuff and make it turn out good. But anyways, move on to the next piece. This is good. So the big thing that happens with these, or that could happen with these, is that, say, the race, or the outer piece of the bearing, could actually turn inside this housing if it's not a tight enough fit. And that could be why we see these dark marks in here. But either way, this is wore out. It won't accept a new bearing properly, or it won't hold the bearing. So luckily, the old one is going to work fine, so maybe I can use that as a spare someday if I ever need to again. So I chose to replace this bearing because of the slop in the housing. This is the new bearing, and I can hardly even turn that in the housing. So that was a good move to replace this whole housing. This is a Fafner part as well. One of the biggest problems with this machine is this PTO bracket right here, and the PTO tensioner. So this goes around the PTO shaft, sits in here like this, and this is tensioned with springs. So ultimately, these springs go on there, you put the nuts on there, and the belt is pulling this way, well, this way. So it's wanting to constantly tension these springs. So anyway, what's happening here is that this side of the pulley block is rubbing on that metal right there, and it's causing quite a bit of damage. See, the hole is all ovaled out, and in this case someone actually welded metal on top of the original structure. See, that's originally only like 3/16. Someone welded this on in an effort to strengthen this. So as you can see, this one is actually cracked, where there's probably quite a high stress involved with that block constantly hitting. So I'm going to have to try to modify these brackets so that this doesn't keep happening. So my solution is going to be to take this piece of Lexan, this is 3/8 inch thick polycarbonate, and make a shim to put in here to where this can ride on this shim and wear into that shim instead of wearing into the metal. So I'll show you guys what I'm going to do. These holes are all ovaled out. I'm going to take that MIG welder and fill those in and then grind them down. So that'll be another nice test for this MIG welder. So I've got that all welded up. Now I've got to grind and dress up all these holes. So now that I've got this all welded, I'm going to have to clean up the holes here so I can fit this piece of threaded rod in between. I'm using this Ingersoll die grinder to kind of come in here and clean that all up, so it'll be a really nice fit for the adjuster itself once that's all cleaned up and ready to go. And this is just a wax that I'm using to help cool the end of this blade here, because that generates a lot of heat. And to keep them sharp longer, you got to keep them cool. So I got that all done. That was quite a bit of work, more than I was anticipating, to get all these holes rebuilt and reconstructed. That was a lot of work. So ultimately though, what we have now is a really nice fit. That's going to be a really great product that I can use on that machine without having to spend all kinds of money. So this is how this goes together. This whole assembly slides to tension the belt. So now that I've got this bracket reconstructed and it's going to be nice and solid, what I'm going to have to do is make a shim to set in here and help this tensioner pulley slide instead of ruining the bracket like it's done. So I'm going to take and bevel that corner so that this sits flush. If you guys have never worked with Lexan before, it truly is awesome stuff. You can drill it, you can cut it, grind it, shape it. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. And it's a really durable plastic. I mean, this stuff is incredibly strong. It's almost bulletproof. You know, you can run over this stuff with a cement truck and it's gonna be totally fine. I mean, it might deform it a little bit, but as you can see, I'm getting in there and getting in there and making a channel so that this slides nice and easy. But as you can see here, I'm using a block plane to trim this stuff. I mean, it's super, super easy to mold. Just obviously don't use your grandfather's block plane. You know, that's $400 block plane. This is just an El Cheapo Stanley. Doesn't matter if it really gets beat up. So as you can see, I've got a really nice fit for that piece of polycarbonate. Now I'm going to be able to take and drill a hole right in the middle of that. So I got this ground out here. I made a little channel for the block to sit on. And I'm going to cut it. That's going to be my shim. Got this bearing retainer all together, all painted up nice. And as you can see, my shim that's going to be in there. So I'm just about ready to start putting this thing together. Got the PTO shaft here, got the machine ready to go. I've got the new bearing, it's hard to see, but the new bearing is down there. As you can see, the new Fafner bearing block is right there. Took a little extra time, but I got the PTO brake all painted and cleaned up, and all the shaft collars painted, and the spacers. This is a spacer for the PTO brake and the Fafner bearing block. So it's all painted up nice. This thing should look good once it's all together. So this PTO brake goes on the PTO shaft like this, and it clamps onto the shaft. And then there's this spacer which goes in between the Fafner bearing, and the PTO brake. Now I've added this clamp here. This clamp is going to be one extra thing to go on the end, and this is going to help this PTO brake from loosening up. And all that's going to work together pretty well. And I had one of these left over because I got that spare PTO shaft with the hardware, so I'm going to use this over. Alright guys, I apologize. The lighting underneath this thing is not great. And now it just got worse. Okay. So this is kind of the hardest part of this whole thing, is to get that front bearing lined up and able to slide onto the shaft here without spilling all of this stuff. Okay. Let's put a little bit of this anti-seize on there. You don't really want to have that really thick on there though, because that can actually cause that to slip. You don't really want that. You just want enough that this bearing retainer, this housing, goes on this PTO shaft without any problems. And that works just like that. Okay. All right, and there it is. Okay. So we've made sure all of our shims are on there. Sorry about the lighting, guys, again. Gonna put a belt on there just to kind of get to see how everything lines up. Okay, both belts are on. Okay, so now you guys can finally see the way this thing works and the way that shim works right there. So once these nuts are tightened up, that's going to keep constant tension on those two belts. And that's going to also keep tension on this shim that I installed here. So because I did that, now the PTO shaft is much more secure than it was before. So it's not going to be bouncing around here, wearing into that metal that we fixed. Alright, so I got this PTO brake slid into place. And that was kind of tricky to get that slid into place because that keyway on the shaft has to be lined up and everything. And the brake has to go around the brake itself. So that slid up, and then this collar can go in place. Okay, so this is the view from the top. As you can see, I got the PTO brake on this side, and that's the Fafner bearing. And this is the lock, the eccentric lock for that bearing, and that kind of slides over. I don't know if you can see that too good, but this spins about 90 degrees, and that's cam-centric, so that actually locks onto that shaft. You have to turn it one way or the other. So this engine turns this way. So it rotates this way. So the PTO shaft is turning this way. You want to turn this lock opposite so that whenever that tightens, it's going to be as tight as it can possibly be. If that ever slips, it'll only slip tighter. Check it out. The PTO is 100% done. Now it's kind of hard to see. See if I can get in there with this light. Here it is from the other side. You can see that shim, kinda, that Lexan shim that I made. I'm thinking that's going to work really good. Alright, and there you can see the locking collar and the PTO brake. Got that all installed. A better view from up top. So, pretty excited about this. Every one of these machines, these 932s, 935s, every one of these machines that I've ever seen has had PTO issues of some kind. So this PTO is really kind of a poor design. The way they engineered this PTO and this tensioner right here. So I'm hoping that that Lexan shim that I made is really going to do wonders, and it's going to keep this from vibrating around and ruining this pulley like it did on the old one. So I'll show you guys more. So the PTO easily snaps in place on the PTO shaft, just like a PTO on a tractor for like a bush hog or, you know, on a rototiller or anything like that. Basically the same exact PTO attachment. So that's on there. That was easy enough. Grease the PTO shaft. Luckily the U-joints are in really good shape. So I'm calling the PTO 100% complete. So if you guys have made it this far, thanks for watching. Hopefully this video helped you. I know there's not a lot of information out there on these machines, let alone particular information like, you know, your PTO and deck spindles and, you know, steering and stuff like that. These things are kind of like the unicorn in the room. You know, there's not a lot of content covering this. So I'm going to end the video right here. Basically, the PTO is all ready to go. I'm going to do a few more things to the machine to get it ready so I can actually take it out and test it. Got to check the gearbox fluid in the mower deck. Got to check the belts. Got to check the steering cylinders, make sure the hydraulic fluid is up to snuff. Got to service it. Got a bunch of other little stuff like that. So, guys, let me know in the comments if you even enjoy these videos. You know, I know some of these videos just ramble on. There's a lot of small details. I mean, I'd like to make videos that people actually enjoy. So if anyone out there is getting usefulness out of these videos, please let me know. I appreciate it. But anyways, this video is going to end right here. Appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully this at least helps somebody out there in the world with one of these machines. So appreciate it, guys. Thanks for watching, and till the next one.